Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So it's another snowy day here in Ohio, and another day where we unfortunately cannot roll the Mark II outside to power wash it. However, what we can work on is getting this stuffed back into the Mark IV. So if you guys have been around the channel for any length of time recently, you'll know my struggles with getting the transmission pan to seal on this transmission. So the first time I had a Moroso gasket on it, which caused the transmission to leak. So I removed the pan and did what I thought was the right thing to do, which was putting a basic black Felpro gasket on it with a skim coat of RTV on either side. Now that ended up being the incorrect way to approach this problem, to approach solving it, as well as ATF has a bit of a solvent property to it, as one of you guys so graciously told me in the comments. And it acting as a solvent actually caused the RTV to fail and the leak persisted. So what my initial plan was to have the transmission pan O-ringed, and the more that I looked at it and talked to my buddy Matt, who is my machinist, the more that we realized that O-ringing it wasn't going to be a realistic possibility, which I'll show you guys why in a few moments. But what we are going to do today is hopefully seal this thing up once and for all with a very basic method, which is just a black Felpro gasket with no dressing on it. Now, I have a number of local friends that run transmissions very similar to this, same cases, same pans, etc., etc. And I've looked underneath of their cars numerous times to see absolutely zero transmission fluid leaking out, which leads me to believe that I was in fact overcomplicating this by trying to dress the gasket, trying to do things what I thought was the correct way, what ended up actually being the incorrect way. So we're going to re-examine this today, and hopefully by the end of this video I'll have everything with the car back together so it can run and I guess not drive, since we have a bunch of sloppy, slushy snow on the ground. But it'll at least be back together for whenever I get a nice weather day and I can take the thing out and actually go on an enjoyable drive with it. So without me rambling on any more right now, let's go ahead. I'll flip the transmission over and show you guys exactly why the O-ring solution wasn't going to be the best or the most effective one. With the pan off, we can see there are a few differences between the pan rail on the transmission and the pan rail on the pan itself. Now, if we look at the pan, there appears to be plenty of space on either side of the bolt holes to do a nice double O-ring around the entire thing, which isolates the actual bolt holes for the transmission fastener, the transmission pan fasteners, and is a redundant sealing system. But when we get over to the transmission itself, we can see bolt holes like these right here would work out fine. But then we get into areas like this right here, where you can see that the distance from the outside of the rail to the side of the bolt hole here is thinner than what it is on this bolt hole here. This bolt hole right here is thinner on the inside than the outside, and so on and so forth. So we're dealing with an inconsistent thickness or inconsistent width of the pan rail the whole way around the transmission, or on the transmission case itself. So this doesn't give us a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of putting an O-ring or a double O-ring solution on the pan itself. And the thing that we also have to keep in mind is the slop that the bolt has in the bolt hole. So you can see, maybe if I do it this way, you can see how much wiggle room there is there. And when you're dealing with precise tolerances like we would be with O-ringing this this transmission pan on, you need to have the bolt holes be tight tolerance as well, or have it doweled or something along those lines, so it always goes back in the same location. The way it is right now, with all the bolt holes having that bit of slop to them, the pan may not sit exactly in the same location each time. And if we're dealing with a tight area like the inside right here, or any of the other tight bolt holes on here, what we could end up doing is having the O-ring protrude into the side, into the inside of the transmission right here, and not sealing at all, and then we would have a leak from another location, and that would not be a good thing. So we talked to Matt about it, and we looked at a couple other transmission cases and came up with the verdict that it's good in theory, but not the most practical in practice to actually do the O-ring solution that we initially thought of. So that, coupled with examining other transmissions and realizing, well, if they were able to get it to seal without doing anything crazy or outlandish, why can't I get mine to seal the same way? So that's exactly what we're going to try to do. So I have another one of the Felpro gaskets here. I'm going to clean up the pan rail on the transmission, clean up the pan rail on the pan itself, put everything back together with just a simple undressed Felpro gasket, and we'll see if that solves the problem or not. The transmission is back together, the pan is on, and I actually followed a torque sequence this time as opposed to the old German method of Gudentight. But this is the gasket and the setup that all my buddies are running that are having great success with not putting a bunch of transmission fluid on the ground. So we'll give it a shot and see what happens. So the pan's on, it's tight, the converter is on, it is slid back, and the transmission is ready to go in the car at this point. So before it can go in, we need to get the flywheel on, and my new flywheel bolts came in. These are from ATF Speed, who the transmission adapter setup is from. So these are their ARP bolts, and you can see the torque spec of 61 to 70 pound-feet, and they also specify use red Loctite. So let's get the car up in the air, get the flex plate over there, get it installed, and we can begin putting the rest of this setup back together. One thing that's very important to do whenever you're working with something that's torqued that isn't easily viewable like these is to come in. Right now I'm just using this little Milwaukee paint pen, but you want to make witness marks that you'll be able to see later on if things are loosening up. So all that I'm doing is just putting a line off of each of these fasteners that will indicate to me later on if things have loosened. So there we have 8 paint marker lines. And I'll be able to tell later on, whenever this comes apart again, if things loosened when I didn't want them to loosen. So now that we have that done, we can go ahead, move to, let's see, maybe that'll get you guys in frame, but we can move to this actual adapter plate deal, get it fastened on, get it tightened down. We'll use the paint pen method on all of these fasteners as well. And then at that point, it'll be time for the transmission to go in. The engine side of the transmission adapter is installed, tightened down, Loctited, all of that. So here is what we have. And if you guys have been around the channel for a while, you've seen this view before, but if you are new, this is what my transmission adapter looks like. So it's part mid plate, part adapter. You can see the mid plate ears behind the IN lines there. I guess this is the better side to see. So this is the rear engine mount and the front engine mount. The front is on plate, it is on a plate as well, but the flex plate and the flywheel, that whole assembly is tightened down. And even on the front side here, if you guys can see, I did my little paint line deal there for all of those fasteners. So now we'll know if anything loosens up, if the car starts making odd noises or anything. So it's time for me to get out of here for today. So tomorrow we'll come in and then we can get started on actually putting the transmission back in the car, getting all of this buttoned up, and before too long, this thing will be ready to run and drive again. So I'll see you guys then. We'll keep rolling along with this car and get it all back together and ready to be used again. Today, the Supra's transmission goes back in, hopefully for good. Now, yesterday we came in, put the pan back onto the transmission with the new Felpro gasket, and hopefully this is the key to not having transmission fluid put down on the ground any longer. So what I'm going to do before we start putting the transmission in is clean up the remnants of the last sealing attempt for this transmission pan, as there's still a little bit of ATF on the ground, and I'd like the floor to be clean so that way I can easily tell if there is a fluid leak this time around. So I'll do that off camera, and then we'll get to putting this transmission back in. So let's go ahead and get to it. The transmission is back in the Supra, and I went ahead and fastened the converter as well with the new 1/2-inch bolts. Makes me really happy that all that fits. The shift linkage is attached, and I retorqued the two fasteners that are shared between this bracket and the pan. And I also went ahead, hooked up the two cooler lines, which I'll go ahead and wipe those off and clean up the little bit of fluid that came out of them as I was hooking them up. But other than that, This transmission is in the car, and the next thing to do will be to put the drive shaft in. Then it can be lowered down. I can put fluid in it and finally fire this thing up again. Although I suppose I should probably put the exhaust on as well. So making good progress, and not too much longer before I can hear this thing fire up again, as it's been quite a bit of time before, or since I've heard the beautiful 2JZ noises. So what I do need to do is run down the road and get 2 additional bolts, as I like to run a minimum of 4 bolts with this Turbo 400 bell housing, and right now it only has 2 in place, and if I may confess, it's always had 2 in place as opposed to the 4. It's doweled, it has 2 large dowel pins in it that hold everything centered, so it isn't really a concern of the transmission falling out, but I'd rather double up the clamping that it has, double up the number of bolts. It'll just make me feel better, and one less thing that I'll have to worry about. So I'll go get those fasteners, come back, put those 2 bolts in, put the drive shaft in, throw the exhaust in, and then before long, we'll hear this thing make a symphony again. She is all back together. Transmission fluid has been poured back in the car and ready to fire it up. So I would love to take it out for an actual test drive, as I miss being behind the wheel of this car going down the road, but that is not going to happen today. But that won't prohibit us from at least being able to hear it and experience all the senses of the car sitting here idling. So without me rambling on, let's go ahead and fire the thing up. Cold out there. So, the first startup, the first heat cycle, seems to have been a success thus far. Granted, I won't have an idea if it's actually leaking fluid until it sits and cools off and goes through a complete heat cycle. And that likely won't be until tomorrow. So that's going to be about it today, and just about it for the video as well. But we'll come in tomorrow, check and see if the simplest solution ended up being the most effective solution with a simple, cheap Felpro gasket. I'll update you guys then, and hopefully the end of this video is a big success rather than me wanting to bounce my head off the bottom of the car. Just got back from dinner and I could not help myself. So the Supra will have cooled down at this point in time, and I haven't walked out here to look at anything yet to see if there is transmission fluid on the ground. So this will be my authentic reaction to if it's leaked again or if it has not. So let's go ahead and go check it out. So fingers crossed there is nothing on the ground, because there isn't really much else I can do to remedy this. And it looks like we have some engine oil, which that's fine. That's kind of to be expected. But if we take this up the rest of the way, fingers crossed we don't have any on the transmission pan. So lifts max, always put the lift on the locks. And let's see. Oh man, I don't see anything. That is fantastic. Let me grab a light. Off to a really good start. So, I wanted to actually heat cycle this thing the entire way. Oh man, come on, stupid light. Just need to get another one. So, a little bit of moisture on the front of it, but I don't see any gigantic puddles on the ground. And I'll go through and retorque all of these fasteners as well. There's a little bit of moisture around the gasket area, around the mating surface, but nothing pouring out right now. And I'm, at this point in time, willing to accept a small leak. I just didn't want a gigantic one like we had before. But I don't see anything massive on this. If there are any leaks, they're tiny in comparison to what they were. So I think we might have actually done it. We might have actually sealed this up. So I'll keep you guys updated as time goes on and I get more heat cycles and more use out of this. But at least for right now, it looks like the massive transmission fluid leak that we had before is finally solved. So this is an example of trying to overdo something and actually ending up hurting yourself in the long run. As I was trying to seal it up with RTV and everything else, and that wasn't the right move, wasn't the right approach to it. But turns out the $8 Felpro gasket with no dressing and an actual torque sequence on the pan, at least at this point in time, granted we have one heat cycle on it, and I still need to check the transmission fluid level and everything else, but it seems as though we've solved the issue for right now. So with a big weight off of my shoulders, with not immediately having transmission fluid on the ground, that's going to be the end of this one. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, for watching me fiddle and battle this stupid transmission pan. The whole build series with this car, the beginnings of the Mark II, which I know we need to get back on that car, but I can't really do much about Mother Nature and how she wants to, or what hand that she deals me. But there's still plenty to do on these cars and plenty more projects to come. And I just thank you guys very much for coming along on this ride with me. But without rambling on incessantly, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.